have you ever looked at a map of the ancient world and wondered why all the first great civilizations popped up in similar places? Yeah, it wasn't a coincidence. There's a really powerful and actually pretty simple reason for it, and that's what we're going to break down right now.
Okay, let's play a little game. Imagine you and, say, a few hundred of your friends are dropped somewhere to build a brand new society. Forget about laws or buildings for a second. What is the absolute #1 thing you'd need right off the bat to survive and grow? Yep, for our ancestors, the answer was always the same: a river. For thousands of years, these river valleys were basically the cradles of civilization. They were the launch pad for everything that came after. But what was so special about them? To really get this, we're going to look at one of the OG civilizations, Mesopotamia. You know, the name itself kind of gives it away. It literally means the land between two rivers. In this case, the Tigris and the Euphrates.
And we're not talking about some legend here. This is real history. Way back around 3800 BCE, people started settling in this region, building some of the world's very first big cities. And you can bet they didn't pick that spot by throwing a dart at a map.
So, what was the big deal with these rivers? Well, it turns out they were like the ultimate starter pack for building a society from the ground up. Okay, so some of the gifts are pretty obvious, right? You've got fresh water to drink, check. You've got fish to eat, check. And the river itself is like a natural highway for moving people and goods around. But there was one more gift, a kind of secret ingredient that would literally change the course of human history.
And that secret ingredient was the flood. Now, I know what you're thinking. A flood, isn't that a catastrophe? And yeah, most of the time, you'd be right. But for these early people, the annual, predictable flood was the best thing that could have ever happened to them.
Here's how the magic worked. Every year, snow from the far-off Zagros Mountains would melt, causing the Tigris and Euphrates rivers to swell up and spill over their banks. Then, when the water pulled back, it left behind this thick layer of amazing nutrient-rich soil called silt. It basically turned a dry, difficult landscape into a farmer's paradise.
But you know, there was a catch. The river was generous, but it was also kind of wild and unpredictable. So the real key to building a civilization wasn't just living near the river, it was about learning how to tame it.
This is the real turning point in the story. This is where humans stop being just victims of their environment and start taking control. Art ingenuity really begins to shine through here.
They came up with a total game changer: irrigation. And it was a brilliant 3-step process. First, they dug canals to pull water away from the river. Second, they built gates to control exactly how much water went where. And third, they used this system to water their crops, letting them farm on a massive scale like never before.
And mastering irrigation, wow. This wasn't just about growing a bit more food. This was the spark that lit an absolute fire, a revolution that completely changed their entire way of life.
Because all of this led to the single most important development in the story of civilization, the food surplus. For the first time ever, people weren't just living hand to mouth, constantly worried about their next meal.
A food surplus. It sounds simple, right? It just means you have more food than you need to eat. But the implications are massive. It means you have security. It means you have wealth. It means you have something you can store, and crucially, something you can trade.
And this is where the world really starts to open up. Look, Mesopotamia had tons of extra grain and clay, but they didn't have much wood or metal. So what did they do? They traded. They sent their extra wheat and pottery all the way to places like Egypt and India in exchange for the stuff they needed. This is the beginning of a global economy.
Okay, so you've got extra food, you've got trade, but now things are getting complicated. And they're getting complicated fast. You've got a lot of new problems to solve.
I mean, seriously. Think about it. Who's going to manage the canal system? Who protects the giant storage silos full of grain? Who keeps track of all these trade deals? You can't just wing it. You need organization, you need leadership. And bam, just like that, new jobs start popping up. You need rulers, kings to manage big projects. You need soldiers to protect all this new wealth. And you need scribes to keep track of everything. In fact, this need for record-keeping is what drove the invention of one of the very first writing systems, cuneiform. So what you end up with is a social pyramid, kind of like this one. At the very top, you've got your kings and priests. Underneath them, you have a new middle class of merchants and scribes. And at the bottom, you have the farmers and workers who make the whole thing run. It's kind of wild to think that this entire social structure grew out of figuring out how to manage water from a river. All right, let's bring this all home. We've seen how one single geographic feature, a river, can literally be the seed that an entire complex civilization grows from.
It really is like a recipe, isn't it? You start with a river, you add in some human ingenuity, you create a food surplus, and suddenly you have the fuel for trade, government, writing, a civilization. And this pattern repeated itself all over the ancient world.
This quote from the source material just nails it. The way these people organized their society, their government, their jobs, it was all connected directly to their environment. Geography wasn't just the background for history. In a lot of ways, it was writing the script.
So now, I'm going to flip the question back to you. Based on everything we just talked about, if you had to start a civilization from scratch today, where would you build it? What kind of environment, what kind of resources would you prioritize? Think about it. The answer you come up with says a lot about what we as humans truly need to thrive.